This story begins with a question that sounds small but is not. When was the last time you trusted your own memory? Not your calendar, not your notes app, not the screenshots you forgot to delete, but your actual memory, the one inside your head. For more than a decade, technology promised to help us optimize our bodies. Count your steps, track your sleep, measure your heart, close the ring. It told us that health could be reduced to numbers and that discipline could be automated. And for a while, we believed it. We wore the bands, we chased the goals. We learned to see ourselves as dashboards. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. The data stopped making us feel empowered and started making us anxious. The devices stopped cheering and started judging. And quietly, almost invisibly, the real problem revealed itself. It was never that we didn't move enough. It was that we were forgetting too much. Forgetting conversations, forgetting ideas, forgetting promises, forgetting parts of our own lives. This video is not about fitness trackers. It is about what came after them. The moment the industry gave up on optimizing the body and turned its attention to augmenting the mind. The rise and fall of the quantified self, the failure of the screenless future, and the emergence of a new kind of technology that does not count your steps, but remembers your life. It started with a number that felt like science because it looked like a prescription. 10,000 steps. Clean, specific, repeatable. The kind of the target you could build a life around. The kind of target you could fail at in a way that felt measurable and therefore fixable. In the early 2010s, that number spread like a folklore. It moved through office wellness programs and app store charts, through lunch break conversations and the quiet guilt of elevators. It lived on wrists inside soft silicone bands that did not look like medical devices. They looked like toys or like fashion or like something harmless you could put on and forget. Press a button and a few tiny lights blinked back at you, as if your body had finally learned to talk in a language a phone could understand. The seductive part was never the pedometer itself. People had counted steps for decades. The seduction was the story we told ourselves about what counting meant. Data equals control. If you can measure the machine, you can optimize the machine. And if you can optimize the machine, you can outsmart the messiness of being human. The myth of 10,000 did not need to be true in a clinical sense to work as a cultural engine. It only needed to feel official. It carried the aura of a universal standard, even though its origins were closer to marketing than medicine. That is what made it powerful. It was not a diagnosis. It was the quest. For a few years, the quest felt innocent. The wearables of that era were cheerleaders. They did not ask who you were, what you feared, what you avoided. They asked only whether you moved. They rewarded you for the simplest act of participation. You walked today. You slept last night. Good job. In bright parks and sunlit sidewalks, people turn biology into a game because games are the one kind of pressure we willingly invite into our lives. Badges appeared, streaks formed. Leaderboards taught friends to compete without admitting they were competing. You passed your coworker, you closed the ring, you hit the goal, and for a moment, it felt like the body had been converted from an unpredictable organism into a dashboard you could improve with enough attention. But measurement escalates. It always does. A step count is a door that opens to deeper rooms. Once you accept the idea that your life can be represented as numbers, You begin to hunger for more numbers. Steps become distance. Distance becomes calories. Calories become a kind of morality. Then the wrist learns new tricks. Green lights flicker against skin. The device starts reading your pulse with photoplethysmography, a technology that looks like magic because it turns a living body into a signal. Heart rate arrives, then resting heart rate, then heart rate variability, then sleep staging, then stress scores. The graphs get prettier. The claims get bolder. The apps become a museum of your last 7 days, your last month, your last year, and the museum is always open, always ready to show you evidence that you are improving or evidence that you are falling behind. By the time the late 2010s arrive, the tools are no longer just motivational. They are interpretive. They do not simply reflect your behavior. They tell you what your behavior means, and that is the pivot that matters, because it turns data into judgment. The blinking dots of the early bands are replaced by line graphs. You do not fully understand, but cannot stop checking, the way you do not fully understand weather models, but still look at the forecast, because you need the illusion that tomorrow is predictable. In the beginning, the device is a mirror you enjoy. Over time, it becomes a mirror you fear. Somewhere around 2019, the mood turns. The bright optimism that framed movement as play dims into the dark glow of a phone screen in a bedroom before sunrise. We stop obsessing over how much we moved and start obsessing over whether we deserve to move at all. The center of gravity shifts from activity to recovery, from doing to being ready to do. That shift is subtle enough to sound like progress. It sounds smarter. It sounds more scientific. It also happens to be a near-perfect anxiety engine. Recovery is a brilliant business idea because steps are finite. You can only walk so much, but recovery is infinite. There is no natural endpoint to the question of whether you are rested enough, whether your nervous system is calm enough, whether your body is prepared for strain. And once you package that question as a score, you can deliver it every morning like a verdict. It is not just a metric. It is a mood setter. This is where the wearables industry begins to financialize the body. The sensors are part of the story, but the business model is the real innovation. In the old era, you bought a device and you owned it. In the new era, companies decide you should rent your own biometrics. They dress it up with modern language, hardware as a service. Pay for the interpretation. Pay for the algorithm. Pay for the insight. And if you stop paying, the device does not just lose premium features. It loses meaning. The data becomes a hostage behind a paywall. That is not an accident. A subscription is not merely a revenue strategy. It is a discipline strategy. It changes the relationship between a person and a product. When you pay every month, you feel pressure to justify the payment. You keep wearing the device because not wearing it feels like wasting money. It is the treadmill in financial form. And the product learns that the best way to keep you paying is not to keep you happy. It is to keep you uncertain, to keep you chasing, to keep you one improvement away from the version of yourself you believe you could be if you tried harder. So the morning score arrives. Green feels like permission. Red feels like failure. And the dangerous part is that the score can shape the body it claims to measure. You wake up feeling fine, you check the app, and the app tells you that you are not fine. It is easy to laugh at that. It is harder to admit how often it works. The mind is porous. Expectations leak into performance. If you believe you are depleted, you behave like you are depleted. You cancel the workout. You soften your plans. you interpret ordinary fatigue as proof that the device was right. A number on a screen becomes a story you tell yourself about your capacity, and that story becomes real. This is the strange irony of the recovery era. The devices are often screenless on the wrist, as if they are trying to feel less invasive. But their judgment is heavier than ever because it lives in your head. You start doing math in social situations. One drink will cost me tomorrow. A late meal will ruin my score. You are no longer just living. You are managing a future you have been trained to fear. By 2023, a quieter fatigue sets in. Not physical fatigue, but subscription fatigue and cognitive fatigue. People do not necessarily stop believing in the promise. They stop enjoying the ritual. They realize they are paying to be judged. They realize the device is excellent at describing the problem and weak at solving it. Sleep more, stress less, drink less. This is advice that is technically correct and emotionally useless. You do not need an algorithm to tell you that your life would be better if it were simpler. You need your life to become simpler, and a device cannot do that for you. Then the market hits the wall that every consumer technology eventually hits: commoditization. By 2024, the magic has leaked out of the hardware. The sensors that once looked premium now come bundled into devices sold for the price of a dinner. A cheap band can match most of the metrics of an expensive watch well enough that the difference becomes philosophical rather than practical. Good enough becomes a knife that cuts the profit margin down to bone. This is the Xiaomi effect, the race to the bottom that proves a brutal truce. Measuring the body is not expensive anymore. It is basically free. When everyone has a heart monitor, nobody feels special. The hardware becomes a shell, and the only remaining place to extract value is software, interpretation, and recurring fees. But the audience is already tired of recurring fees. The category begins to cannibalize itself. At the same time, the industry runs out of new things to measure without crossing into invasive territory. The dream features keep failing. Non-invasive glucose monitoring remains the holy grail that physics refuses to surrender. The wrist is a convenient location for a product, not necessarily a convenient location for blood chemistry. Blood pressure at the wrist remains finicky without awkward compromises. Hydration tracking turns into guesswork. So the future that was promised, the next revolution in health, gets delayed again and again, and users feel it as boredom. That boredom matters. It creates the appetite for a new story. When health tracking becomes a utility, it loses the glamour required to sell upgrades. It becomes like tap water. Essential, expected, not exciting. And in consumer technology, excitement is fuel. So the industry makes a desperate bet. If the body dashboard is boring, maybe the problem is the screen. Maybe we are tired not of measurement, but of the phone itself. Maybe the next revolution is subtraction. Remove the screen. Remove the apps. Remove the addiction machine. Replace it with something quieter, something more humane. This is how 2024 becomes the year of a certain kind of fantasy, the fantasy of the screenless future. A device that would free you from your phone by sitting on your chest like a piece of jewelry, listening, speaking, projecting words onto your hand in green light like a magic trick you can wear. It arrives with the aura of Apple design language and venture capital confidence. It arrives with a price that signals importance and a monthly fee that signals inevitability. It arrives with a promise that sounds moral. Be present. Stop scrolling. Talk to the world again. And then it collides with reality in the way ambitious hardware often does, not as a single dramatic failure, but as 1,000 small humiliations. The projection is hard to see in daylight. The gestures feel unnatural. The latency turns conversation into awkward silence. The device gets hot against the body, a literal discomfort that becomes symbolic. The future is not just inconvenient, it is warm in the wrong way. And the AI, still young, still imperfect, hallucinates and stumbles, and fails at the kind of reliable utility people have come to expect from the phone they already own. What makes this collapse so instructive is not that the product fails. Many products fail. What makes it instructive is the gap between the story and the usage. The story says, post-smartphone. The usage says something else. People do not actually want to replace their phone with a badge that talks back. They want the phone to stop demanding their attention, yes, but they also want the phone to remain the dependable tool it is. They do not want to give up the ecosystem of things the phone does effortlessly. They want relief, not replacement. So the screenless device collapses under the weight of its own ambition. Returns pile up, active usage shrinks. The dream valuation deflates into a fire sale logic. And then the most brutal moment arrives, the moment that burns itself into the memory of anyone paying attention to modern consumer hardware. The servers go dark. The product becomes a brick, not because it broke physically, but because it was never fully a device. It was a terminal to a service. When the service ends, the terminal becomes inert. That is the real lesson. Cloud-dependent hardware is fragile in a way that most consumers do not fully internalize until it happens to them. We have accepted that apps can disappear, that features can change, that subscriptions can rise. But a physical object turning into dead weight overnight forces a different kind of reckoning. It turns trust into anger. It turns design into a waste. It turns the future into a cautionary tale. And yet, inside the wreckage of that failure, the industry finds a clue almost by accident. Because even when the screenless device fails at being a phone, it reveals something about what people were actually doing with it. Not commanding it, not asking it to perform miracles, but letting it listen, capturing moments, recording, saving. In other words, the failure exposes an alternative center of gravity. 2025 becomes an interregnum. The giants hesitate. Investors tighten. Nobody wants to be the next public humiliation. The frontier opens for smaller experiments that are less grandiose and therefore more honest. A necklace that markets itself as a friend, an AI companion that listens and responds with emotional nudges, triggers backlash precisely because it crosses a boundary people did not consent to move. The discomfort is not only about surveillance, it is about intimacy. An AI that pretends to be a person frightens us because it tries to occupy the space of relationship, not the space of tool. It asks to be loved, or at least relied upon, and that feels like an extraction. But another class of device appears beside it. Quieter, more professional, less theatrical. A pendant that records meetings. A clip that transcribes. A system that speaks the language of utility instead of companionship. It offers a promise that is smaller than replacing the phone and therefore more achievable. It does not claim to liberate you from screens. It claims to give you your life back in a different way, by remembering what you cannot. This is the shift that matters. The industry autopsies its own failures and finds a pattern. People hate talking to AI as if it is a servant. They love AI as a witness. The command model is exhausting. The capture model is relieving. The biggest pain is not that the phone exists. The biggest pain is that modern life is too dense to hold inside a biological memory built for another era. This is where the story stops being about wearables as health devices and becomes about wearables as cognitive prosthetics. The most important organ is no longer the heart rate sensor. It is the hippocampus, the brain structure that indexes experience, decides what becomes memory, and forgets the rest. Forgetting is not a flaw in an evolutionary sense. It is a survival feature. But in an information economy, forgetting becomes a daily tax. You leave meetings and forget the exact wording of commitments. You talk to someone and lose the name in minutes. You hear a brilliant idea and watch it dissolve because you did not capture it in time. So the hypothesis forms. What if the wearable is not a monitor for the body, but a hard drive for the mind? What if the next revolution is not optimizing the machine, but augmenting the operator? What if the new metric is not steps, but context? Then January 2026 arrives, and with it, the place where technology goes to announce its next obsession. Las Vegas, a convention floor full of neon promises and giant screens, but the real signal hides in the wearables aisle where something is missing. The spec sheets are blank where biometrics used to be. No step counting, no sleep staging, no oxygen saturation. The absence is the message. The body is no longer the frontier. The mind is. A ring appears that looks like smart jewelry but contains no health sensors pressed against the skin. It is smooth. It does not glow green in the dark. It is not trying to read your blood. It is trying to hear your life. A band appears that promises guidance without the tyranny of dashboards, and it takes a public swing at subscription fatigue by refusing to rent you your own data. A headset appears that puts cameras where eyes are without forcing you to wear glasses, not to create a new screen, but to create a new kind of perception, a way to see and summarize, translate and interpret, without demanding that you stare at a rectangle. And in parallel, a different battle is happening at the scale of a paperclip. The clip wars, small screenless recorders that attach to a lapel or hang on a necklace, almost invisible, almost boring, and that is exactly why they work. They do not touch your skin. They do not pretend to be fashion. They do not promise to replace the phone. They promise a second brain. This is where the category finally becomes legible. The earlier failures were trying to subtract the phone. The new devices are trying to subtract forgetting. That is a more human goal and a more defensible one because it aligns with how people already behave. We already outsource memory to calendars, to notes apps, to photos we rarely revisit. We already live inside archives. The difference is that these devices promise to capture the parts of life that never become text, the spoken commitments, the accidental ideas, the subtle context that makes a conversation meaningful. The utility is intoxicating. Search your life like a database. Ask what book was recommended 3 weeks ago and get an answer with the exact phrasing. Ask what you promised in that meeting and hear your own voice making the commitment. Let an AI summarize a rambling hour into action items. Feel the strange relief of knowing that you do not have to hold everything inside your head. The cognitive load drops. Your attention becomes less frantic. Presence becomes possible, not because the device forces you to be present, but because it catches the part of you that is always afraid of losing something. This is also where the shadow returns. The shadow that has haunted wearable computing since the first time someone walked into a bar wearing a device that looked like it could record. The legacy of social rejection, the fear of surveillance, the question that sits behind every microphone in public. Am I being recorded? The industry responds with what can only be described as engineered trust. Trust lights, physical toggles, consent modes, design transparency, visible indicators that perform honesty. It is theater, yes, but theater matters because social contracts are built on signals. A light that is always on when recording is not just a technical feature. It is a promise your friends can see. It is the difference between a memory tool and a spy tool. The metaphor shifts too. From social media extraction to vaults, end-to-end encryption, local processing, words that try to make your private archive feel like a diary instead of a dataset. And still, the bargain remains. Perfect recall is a superpower with a cost. The privacy of the ephemeral moment has value, the ability to speak and let the words vanish. We have always relied on forgetting as a social lubricant. It allows reinvention. It allows forgiveness. It allows people to be more than their worst sentence. A world where everything is searchable changes that texture. Even if the devices are meant for personal use, they normalize the idea that life can be recorded by default. This is why the most honest way to talk about the new era is not as a gadget trend, but as infrastructure. Health tracking became boring because it succeeded. It became water and electricity, always there, mostly invisible, rarely celebrated. Cognitive augmentation is moving along the same path. At first, it looks like a product. Then it becomes a habit. Then it becomes an expectation. And eventually it becomes something you forget you're using, which is the final form of technology. Not the thing you stare at, but the thing that quietly rearranges what it means to be capable. In the quantified self era, the wearable promised control over the body. It told you that discipline could be outsourced to numbers. In the subscription era, it told you that readiness could be purchased and that judgment could be automated. In the commoditization era, it proved that measurement is easy and differentiation is hard. In the screenless disaster era, it proved that replacing the phone is not a moral victory if it creates fragile dependence on the cloud. And in the memory pivot, it reveals a deeper truth. The real scarcity is not steps, it is attention. The real pain is not inactivity, it is cognitive overflow. The real enemy is not the body failing. It is the mind being asked to remember a modern world with ancient hardware. So the arc becomes clear. We are moving from optimizing the body to augmenting the mind, from dashboards to archives, from counting to witnessing. The new devices are not trying to give you a better graph. They are trying to give you continuity, a way to carry your own life without dropping so much of it on the floor. They promise that even if you forget, the machine remembers. And that promise will shape everything that comes next. It will shape how we work, because meetings will become searchable and therefore accountable. It will shape how we learn, because lectures and conversations will become revisitable, and the act of studying may become less about note-taking and more about synthesis. It will shape how we argue because the past will be less malleable when it can be replayed. It will shape how we love because memory is intimacy, and to store it is to decide what kind of permanence a relationship deserves. It will shape how we forgive because forgiveness often relies on forgetting, and forgetting may become harder when recall is perfect. In other words, this is not a sequel to the fitness tracker. It is a new kind of tool that sits closer to identity than to exercise. The body was measurable and therefore marketable until the measurement became cheap and boring. The mind is messier, more valuable, more fragile, and more profitable, which is why the frontier moved there as soon as it could. The industry will tell you this is about productivity, about action items and summaries and workflow. But underneath, it is about something older and more human. The fear of losing our past, the shame of forgetting what mattered, the exhaustion of pretending we can keep up. We once wore devices that congratulated us for walking. Then we wore devices that judged us for sleeping. Now we are wearing devices that quietly try to hold on to our lives. And the strangest twist is that the more the machine remembers, the more we may be able to let go, not of responsibility, but of the constant mental grip required to survive modern density. If an external hippocampus becomes normal, attention can become lighter. Presence can become less performative. The future that screenless prophets promised, and the future where you look up instead of down, may arrive not by killing the phone, but by reducing the panic that drives you to check it. This is the post-screen killer era. Not because screens vanish, but because they lose monopoly over meaning. A phone becomes what it always should have been, a tool you use when you choose, not a slot machine you cannot stop feeding. And beside it, quietly, you carry a witness, a ring, a clip, a band, a small object with a microphone and a promise that your life will not evaporate as fast as it used to. If you are listening to this and it feels like liberation, notice what you are reacting to. It is not the hardware. It is the relief of being allowed to forget without losing everything. It is the dream that you can be present without paying a tax in missed details. It is the hope that your mind can remain human, imperfect, leaky, intuitive, while something else handles the archival labor of modern existence. And if it feels like a warning, notice that too, because both reactions are correct. A perfect memory is a gift and a threat. It can save you from overload and trap you in documentation. It can protect you from losing yourself and tempt you to outsource yourself. The technology will not decide which it becomes. We will, through the social contracts we enforce, the defaults we accept, the moments we choose not to record, the boundaries we insist remain unmeasured. The quantified self began as a simple number that felt like science. It ends, for now, as a different kind of number, not steps per day, but memories per life. The growing sense that what matters is not how efficiently you move through the world, but how much of the world you can actually keep. The body became a utility. The mind became the frontier. And the next decade will be defined by whether we build this new cognitive infrastructure as a vault that belongs to the person, or as a pipeline that belongs to the market. Because the final truth is the one every era keeps rediscovering. Data always wants more data. Measurement always wants escalation. The only real question is, who benefits when your life becomes legible? If you want to keep going deeper into the story, follow the thread all the way through the next wave of devices. the standards they claim to use, the legal frameworks they quietly shape, and the social etiquette that will emerge around recording the ordinary. Subscribe for the next chapter of the post-humane era, where remembering becomes default, forgetting becomes a choice, and the most powerful technology in the room is the one that does not look like technology at all. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever felt overwhelmed by information, frustrated by forgetting, or uneasy about the quiet trade-offs technology asks us to make, then this channel is for you. This documentary is part of a larger series about invisible infrastructure, the systems we stop noticing once they reshape how we live, think, and remember. If you want to see what comes next, subscribe. Not just for the next video, but for the next chapter of the shift. Like the video if it helped you see the last decade of technology differently. Share it with someone who still thinks wearables are just about health. And tell us in the comments what you would want an external memory to remember for you. Because the post-humane era is not coming. It is already here. And how we choose to use it will decide whether these machines become tools for clarity or engines of control.